comfort moment when silence dares you to speak, when the world tells you no and you whisper back, "Watch me." This is the story of Barack Obama, not the politician, but the boy with a missing father. The student chasing identity, the organizer fighting forgotten battles on Chicago streets. He rose not with luck, but with relentless grit, turning rejection into fuel and doubt into destiny. From food stamps to the presidency, his journey is a blueprint for anyone who's ever felt invisible. If you think your dreams are too big, watch this. Because once you hear how he made the impossible possible, you'll never say, "I can't" again. He was born in the tropical stillness of Honolulu, far from the marble columns of Washington, far from any map that pointed to power. His mother, Anne, raised him on scholarships and scraped together rents, teaching him that intellect without empathy is empty noise. His father, gone almost as soon as memory began, left behind a surname heavy with myth and expectation. Young Barack wrestled with identity the way some kids wrestle with algebra, writing poems to make sense of two shores inside one skin. On nights when loneliness howled, he would close his eyes and picture a wider horizon, somewhere sturdy enough to hold the questions he carried. Schoolyards taught him early that names can sting. Barry became camouflage, a syllable he draped over the syllable that felt too foreign for fist bumps in baseball. But words were never just labeled to him. They were ladders out of smallness, ropes across chasms. He read until streetlights blinked off, devoured everything from Marcus Aurelius to Malcolm X, tasting the power of voices that reached back through centuries to steady trembling hands. Every page was proof that invisibility is temporary if you choose to speak. At 19, he touched mainland America like a live wire. Los Angeles first, then the stone courtyards of Columbia University. The city was thunderous, indifferent, magnificent. He worked cafeteria lines for tuition, marched across Harlem sidewalks with calloused hope, and realized that the country's pulse beat strongest in its fractures. The gap between what is and what could be had room for someone willing to bridge it. One afternoon, looking down from an East Harlem rooftop at a patchwork of rusted fire escapes, he felt the idea click. My life only matters if it lifts other lives. So he headed for Chicago, the city of shoulders broad enough to carry impossible weights. Southside streets taught lessons colder than any textbook, steel mills boarded up, mothers aging overnight, children memorizing gunshot decibels instead of multiplication tables. Obama, 24 and skinny as rebar, became a community organizer paid just enough to keep the lights on. His job, convince people who had stopped believing in ballots and promises to believe in themselves again. On winter nights, he sat in church basements, smelling a coffee in despair, listening more than speaking, turning grief into action plans. Job, training centers, asbestos removal, voter registration drive. Change came inch by inch, but on those inches, he learned a craft that would one day move nations, the craft of listening first, then lifting. Failure stalked him. Of course, when he ran for Congress in 2000, the ballots came back like a slap 2-1 against him. Reporters called it career suicide. Donors vanished overnight. He drove home alone on election night, rain tapping Morse code doubt against the windshield. But on his coffee table sat a battered copy of Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. He opened it, read about 27 years in a prison cell that could not cage a voice, and felt embarrassment shrink beside true enjoyment. Losing an election wasn't fatal. Quitting would be. So he doubled down, studied policy like scripture, woke at dawn to run along Lake Michigan until lungs burned clean, showed up in living rooms and union halls until people stopped seeing a curiosity and started seeing a contender. In 2004, under the stadium lights of the Democratic National Convention, he delivered a keynote address that cracked the ceiling of cynicism. There's not a liberal America and a conservative America, he declared. There's the United States of America. Millions watched a stranger speak their secret wish aloud. That unity wasn't naive, it was unfinished business. By the time he stepped off the stage, networks were replaying every syllable. A senator had landed, and his runway now stretched all the way to Pennsylvania Avenue. But the road to the White House is paved with landmines. His name was mocked, his middle name weaponized, his faith questioned, his birthplace litigated in whispers that slithered through inboxes at midnight. The Secret Service, codenamed Renegade, followed him through rope lines, where death threats spiked the air like static. Yet every smear was answered with the same calm grin, because he had learned on Chicago pavement that anger is easy, currency hope is the millionaire's game. Crowds swelled. Iowa cornfields, South Carolina, church pews, Denver arenas vibrating with the chant, "Yes, we can." It wasn't just a slogan. It was a mirror reflecting what Americans wanted to believe about themselves. Election night, 2008, Grant Park. The skyline shimmered like a promise kept. Barack walked onto the stage with Michelle, Malia, and Sasha, beside him proof that history sometimes arrives hand in hand with tomorrow. He spoke into the crisp November air, each word carrying centuries on its back. If there is anyone out there who still doubts, tonight is your answer. Tears streamed down the cheeks of strangers who suddenly felt like family. The impossible had just voted itself possible, and the world exhaled fireworks. Then came the storm. Within weeks, he inherited 2 wars, a banking system collapsing like rotted beams, unemployment lines curling around city blocks. Hope met its crucible. Inside the Oval Office's hushed dawns, he read 10 letters from ordinary citizens every night, mothers rationing insulin, veterans drowning in paperwork, teenagers begging for tuition they couldn't afford. Those letters bruised him, but they also sharpened resolve. He pushed through an $800 billion stimulus to jolt the economies, forced motor companies to reimagine what an engine could be, and signed the Affordable Care Act so illness would never again mean bankruptcy for millions. Each victory cost political capital. Each compromise carved critics from former allies. Yet he kept signing, kept speaking, kept reminding the country that progress is a relay race. You run your leg, then pass the baton. No matter how heavy, personal blows struck to. The mass shooting in Newtown cracked his voice on national television. Charleston broke it again. He sang Amazing Grace at a pulpit stained by hate. Not for performance, but because grief sometimes needs melody to move. In rooms away from cameras, he wrestled with the weight of drone strike, the cold calculus of foreign policy. Leadership, he learned, is choosing which regret you can live with, which nightmare someone else shouldn't have to. Second term, gray streaks spotted his hair, but the grin remained. He thawed half-century hostilities with Cuba, watched as marriage equality swept the land from courtrooms to county clerks, and stood in Paris to rally a planet against climate oblivion. The Nobel Peace Prize sat awkwardly on his shelf. He joked that it was a call to action, not applause. Every sunset ride on Marine One reminded him that altitude doesn't guarantee perspective. You have to keep looking out the windows. January 20th, 2017. The helicopter lifted off the Capitol lawn, carrying him into civilian life. Reporters wondered if relevance would fade. Instead, Barack Obama built a presidential center on Chicago's South Side, seeded hundreds of young leaders through the Obama Foundation, wrote a memoir that cracked open the lonely machinery of power, and with Michelle produced documentaries, amplifying overlooked voices. His stage simply widened. Somewhere tonight, a kid with a hyphenated identity stares at a cracked phone screen, scrolling past noise and negativity, stopping on an old clip, old bomb. On that Springfield stage, voice shaking with audacity, the kid feels the spark that hush before the leap, because the true legacy of Barack Obama isn't sealed in stone or stitched on library walls. It's a contagious permission slip that reads, "Your story, exactly as it is, can move mountains if you dare to tell it." So what's your Springfield moment? What promise will you whisper into winter air while doubt shivers beside you? Remember the lesson etched across Obama's journey. Circumstance is a starting line, not a finish. He turned absence into empathy, setbacks into stepping stones, criticism into compass readings, He did not flinch from the darkness. He made it prove him wrong. The Oval Office lights no longer burn for him at 2 a.m., but somewhere a classroom globe spins and a finger lands on Hawaii, then Kenya, then Chicago, tracing the impossible geometry of hope. Somewhere a little girl is told her skin is too dark, her dreams too bright, and she hears a voice on a podcast reminding her that ceilings crack when courage swings. If this doesn't motivate you, nothing will, because this isn't just Barack Obama's story. It's the story of anyone bold enough to swap excuses for action, of everyone ready to trade someday for starting now. The path is lit. The baton is warm in your palm. Run. And if Barack Obama's journey lit a fire in you, just wait until you hear the story of Elon Musk. From being bullied as a kid in South Africa to shaking up the entire world with Tesla, SpaceX, and more. His rise is even crazier than you think. It's not just about rockets or billions. It's about obsession, risk, and refusing to stop even when the world laughs at you. Watch the next story. Now Elon Musk's unstoppable journey will blow your mind and fuel your hustle like never before.